hopefully I'm doing this right, since this is being recorded. Hope I'm on the right link.
Hey,
Hi. How's
how
it
you
going?
doing? Good. Sorry, I'm running from the last session. I'm like trying to jump in and what Zoom am I on? And anyways,
Yeah, I can imagine.
sweet. All right.
Got the
Um,
lesson in pulled up with you. And do you want me, like all these links that are in here, do you want me to toss them in the chat when
yeah,
we get to
yeah. So just note that I've got the Copilot mural link that's for you in the welcome and intro, and then the actual mural they're going to use is down in the sort of check-in activity part.
Okay. Okay, thank you.
Yeah, no worries. How's your morning so far?
Not too bad. Doing quite a bit of like running around, like phone call wise for Sewell, for the Humans of Impacting, just to get everything set up for next week. But
Oh,
hopefully by
okay.
next week I'll have my like hands clean of it, so that'll be good.
Nice. Getting there, getting there.
Yeah. Yeah, just don't know if this is gonna work, Jeffrey. Um,
Recording here, and we will admit everyone in. We'll get going. All right. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, depending where you're joining us from today. My name's Quentin Evans, and for those of you I haven't met yet, and welcome to the final day of CRW. This has been a really awesome week of programming. Just left a earlier session also around values-based leadership that was absolutely killer. I don't know if any of you got a chance to check that out. Maybe you were able to go to the first one, but what a fun week so far to have been able to dive in and explore some of these. And really happy you're here to join us today for a compelling conversation. We're going to focus on SDG 16 and kind of have a bit of fun envisioning what the future could kind of look like. So before we get going, just a couple of Zoom tips. I know you're Zoom and mural ninjas by now. There's no, learning that's sort of left. But in case anyone's joining us for the first time, we always just ask that unless you're speaking, if you could keep your mic off, or that makes sure we don't have any feedback. Myself or Shay will always be sort of checking out the chat. So if you do have questions that are as they're going along, feel free to drop them in the chat. We'll do our best to address them as we're going. But if we do miss one, we'll definitely circle back at the end when we have our debrief after the session today, and we can tackle any of the Q&A that actually is there. One other tip too is that we are going to go into mural. That's where the most of the session is going to be. So I know that even today in particular, I think it's the weather, but my internet is like kind of in and out a little bit. So a little tip would be that just to try and only have either the Zoom or maybe one tab with the mural open, and try to close down some of the other windows or programs that you have running, just to ensure your computer is actually going at optimal speed, kind of thing here. Okay, so before we start then today, we always like to start our sessions with a land acknowledgement. And so for me and for anyone who was able to join for the Decolonization Cafe when we actually kicked off Changemaking and Residency Week, it was a really profound session, first and foremost. And there was something that Emma Greenfield led us through, which was around a visualization. And I found for myself that was a really powerful exercise. And so I'm going to drop the actual Georgian College land acknowledgement into the chat here so that everyone can have it. But based on some of that learning and my continued growth and relationship, I want to offer a little bit more insight into my personal connection with the land. So I do in Aurelia, just outside Aurelia, I am on the traditional lands of the Haudenosaunee people. And when I think about the land and my relationship to it, I really started realizing just how much I actually use the land, how much I gain from the land in deeper ways. So when I think about my gardens and the fact that I feed myself from this land, and I also with my daily practice, especially when the weather's nice, I'm outside and I'm grounding myself in the energy of the land, and grounding myself by water or the trees that are there, connecting to nature in that way. And so for me, there's a much greater appreciation when I realize just how intricate the land is in my world, to honoring the history of those who stewarded it before I came here, and how much appreciation I have for the stewardship that took place and the responsibility that they had in terms of ensuring that this land was here for me to enjoy. And so from that, then I really realized that there's a really important need for me, A, to honor the history of where it came from, B, to really reflect on what my relationship is, and then C, to make sure that I'm accountable and responsible moving forward myself. How do I steward this land for the next generation? How do I give back to the land? How do I offer a gift back? And so I would just want to end my own personal land acknowledgement with a chance to actually join in that little visualization exercise that Emma taught us, where we're going to take 30 seconds. We'll just be silent. We encourage you to either close your eyes if that works for you, or take a deep breath, and really place yourself back in a spot where you really are connected to the land. So that could be any particular scenario. It could be, during the summertime, it could be during the winter time, just a time when the land had a strong meaning to you. And we'll just stay here for about 30 seconds as we sort of sit and appreciate our own individual story and our own personal connection to the land. Amazing. Thank you so much for taking that moment. I know for me, whenever I do that, I have this instant shift of energy that brings me back to a place of appreciation and gratitude. So what a wonderful way to be able to start this off. Before we actually dive into the session, I want to briefly introduce my amazing co-pilot, Shay, who can actually introduce herself, but she's also going to walk us through a little bit around the Say My Name campaign. So over to you, Shay.
Yeah. Hi, everybody. My name is Shayla McKay. I am a recent graduate from the Social Service Worker program at Georgian College, and I'm currently the CICAN Impact Intern at the Center for Changemaking and Social Innovation. So I get to work with Quentin and the amazing team that put together this whole week, and it's been awesome. I am a Anishinaabe from Fort William First Nations. However, I was born and raised in Owen Sound, which is the traditional territory of Saugeen Ojibwe Nation. They are traditionally Anishinaabe people. We've also had Mississauga people in this area. So that's my connection to the land. As Quentin mentioned, I'm going to talk a little bit about the Say My Name project, which is a project that was designed to tackle social isolation within our community. Really strives to make all the environments inclusive and places to study and work so that everyone feels welcome and feels this sense of belonging in our community. Say My Name allows you to safely learn the proper pronunciation of any individual's name that you interact with. So for those of you who often find that your name gets mispronounced, kind of like Quentin there, Say My Name provides a way that you can help people learn how to pronounce your name without feeling like you have to stay silent or you have to use a nickname. It provides a pretty refreshing icebreaker sometimes, and a learning opportunity for everybody. So this process, it really helps each of us and all the individuals to embrace who they are. And it helps us engage in the group and by promoting positive communication. We were recently at an Ashoka U exchange where everybody's names are different in this conference setting where we want to be able to interact with each other, but sometimes it can be difficult if I will admit to being a little bit proud and I don't want to say the name wrong, so I'll avoid using their name, and that's not very fair. And yeah, so the Say My Name project is designed to tackle that, and it's really incredible. I think Quentin has dropped a link in the video there to the campaign video, so check it out. Back over to you, Q.
Awesome, Shay. Thanks so much. I love that capture. And it's true, when we were at the Ashoka U conference last week, this really came up as a topic and for us. And Shay had this incredible experience of being able to connect one-to-one with this amazing change maker. And it's interesting, again, how often I've felt intimidated, especially in a conference sort of setting, that I wanted to reach out to someone, but I didn't know how to say their name exactly, and I didn't want to embarrass myself. And so I just sort of stood back and maybe didn't make that introduction. And, Shay had the courage to connect and have this incredible experience. So this is the Say My Name campaign really embraces the thought of how do we break down barriers? And that's something we're going to explore today, actually, in terms of the SDG 16. How do we start breaking down some of the barriers in maybe easier, innovative ways that we haven't thought about, so that we can actually make further progress? And whether that's further progress of making one connection with one person who may be sharing something that teaches you, something that is profound in your life, or if it's about a collective, a group of us getting together and being able to communicate and explore, what the criminal justice system in Canada kind of looks like. So that's where we're going to be today. So I know most of you are mural ninjas. Most of you are really, really comfortable with this already, but nonetheless, because I'm not sure, maybe we do have some brand new people to mural. Shay is going to drop our mural link into the chat so that you can actually join us on the mural. And we'll bring us over to our warm-up activities. And so for our warm-up activities, we basically have two questions. And those first question is, what do you think change making is? And again, you've probably answered this like 10 times already throughout the conference. So then I challenge you to say, well, what's changed? Maybe what your first answer is a little bit different. And then the second question, which is underneath that, asks you to say, in one word, describe the current criminal justice system in Canada. So in one word, what's that word that comes to mind? And as we do this, we were just laughing about this in the last session too, trying to find where my share screen is, whereas we switch platforms all the time. So let me see if I can find it here. There we go. Hopefully the team can actually see the screen right now. There was actually there's a bunch of students joining us today who are part of the criminal justice program who I was chatting with yesterday, and I went to share my screen and I shared the wrong one. And, thank goodness these students are kind and we're just like, Quentin, you're on the wrong screen. They didn't laugh too hard. So anyways, so here we are. For those of you who can see my screen, if you go over to the right-hand side to the outline, that's our step one, our warm-up question one. This is where we're going to ask you to actually drop your thoughts in. Now, if you can't actually access the mural, I'm actually seeing that, I'm wondering, Shay, if we might have maybe I put the wrong link in. I'm just not seeing anybody in this right now. This is undoubtedly my fault, team. So I'm going to figure this out. Hang on a second here.
I see some people.
You see some people. Maybe yeah. I need to follow your link. Let's see what comes up here. Oh, yeah. This is the right one. I don't know what happened there. Maybe there's just a little glitch. Okay, so thank you, Shay, for bringing me back on there. I don't know why the other one I had open was not working, but I can see everyone now. I can see some words coming in. Oh, I really love this. What do you think change making is? A necessity. Wow, what an awesome one. That's one I've never seen be put in there before. Very, very cool. Interesting. Flawed. I don't know if that's actually for the criminal justice system or if what you think change making is flawed, but either way, that is a good discussion point that we would bring up. I think it got maybe moved, so maybe it was about the criminal justice system. Making a difference in the world, advancing change for the good of everyone. Love those, some great contributions. Change making is important, absolutely. I could see making a positive change. And then looking at sort of the one word. So yeah, what is that one word you would describe the criminal justice system as? And I see some interesting choices in here. So problematic, unfair, broken, inconsistent, burdensome, which is a really interesting word. Room for improvement. Oh, no worries, Cam. Flawed, dangerous, interesting choice of word again. Biased, absolutely. Blind, okay. Discriminatory, flawed, like everything made by humans. Yeah, it's like the two sides of change makers, right? We have this incredible capacity to make these amazing things. But when we started even with the Land Acknowledgement, the recognition that we also are flawed and we need to do some things better. So it's a really great example. So thanks for the contributions on that, team. That's where we really want to start, is this concept of, what does our current criminal justice system kind of look like? And that's where we're going to play today, is the thought of, let's try to actually explore this a little bit. on our own, and then let's move to a place of saying, so if we could do it different, if we could do it better, if we could be change makers around what the future of the criminal justice system in Canada might look like, then why don't we try and actually explore that? So just to frame out how today's going to go for the next, I guess, hour and 40 minutes or so that we're going to hang out together. Basically, we're going to begin. I'm going to give a quick little overview of SDG 16. Now, we're going to dive into it a bit, but I really want you to know that, this is, for time purposes, this really is just the beginning conversations about it. And so we're framing everything around the concept of our SDG 16, but it's also really important to recognize that this is just a taste of it, that you can get much, much deeper, especially in terms of its application in Canada. And I really, really encourage you to do that. As we go through, there are some links around the SDGs. We can share those with you in the chat as well, so that you can have access to some of this amazing resources and some of the pieces in the future. But today, so just to start, for those who maybe have no background at all with the SDGs, the SDGs actually stands for, so UN SDGs stands for the United Nations Sustainable Development Goals. And you might have heard these called the global goals, or you might have heard it called Agenda 2030. But this is a group of goals that the world and each country is not mandated to do, but is by choice agreeing to start to try to tackle. And the big, big vision is that by 2030, we would have had such an important impact on all of these particular areas that we would have achieve what we're looking to do. So we would achieve a world with no hunger and no poverty. And so these are really audacious goals, but at the same time, we understand that we need sometimes those audacious opportunities and targets for us to actually make great change. So reviewing SDG 16 just a little bit. So SDG 16 is about peace, justice, and strong institutions. And so SDG 16 actually takes a combination of a lot of things. And what you'll find with the SDGs in general is they're highly intersectional. And what we mean by that is they actually really work together. It's really hard to address one particular SDG without addressing another one at the same time, especially if we're trying to develop, solutions and ideas that are going to have sustainable positive impact. And so under this umbrella of peace, justice, and strong institutions, today we're going to dive a little bit into more the criminal justice system in Canada, but recognizing that strong institutions actually go even, much further out than just the justice system. And peace goes much further out than just the justice system. But for today's conversation, we just want to sort of focus on some of those elements. Here's a quick little one pager that I always love to share because it's interesting to see some of the tiny little factoids. And this was produced by the United Nations. And it's interesting when you actually take a minute to sort of slow down and really read. So I want to ground us in this a little bit today before we go too far. And where specifically SDG 16 is promoting peaceful and inclusive societies for sustainable development, provide access to justice for all, and build effective, accountable, and inclusive institutions at all levels. So there's a lot of loaded words in there. And I think sometimes when we see, a statement like that, we sort of brush over it because there's a lot of big words too. We're like, oh, okay, that's a lot. But I really encourage you just to take a second and really think about some of those pieces that are in there. So we think about peaceful. Reflecting back on promoting peaceful, what's a peaceful society kind of look like in your head? What's an inclusive society look like in your head? When we talk about development, what is sustainable development to you? How do we develop things that are not just one-offs or that are not taking from something else? How do we actually create development that's, creating a flourishing economy, a flourishing system, flourishing people? This concept of access to justice for all is one that's going to come up a lot today. And it's one that, for many of us, if we haven't had any direct connection to the criminal justice system in whatever country you're actually coming from, then the concept of an access to justice doesn't seem necessarily all that relevant. It's not something that we've maybe thought about too much. But as we go through today, we're going to really encourage you to really start examining, what access looks like, what it needs to look like, and in what ways we currently are kind of failing at enabling equal and positive and fair and affordable access for individuals in our country. Finally, that accountable and inclusive institutions at all levels. So this is a really big topic that is gaining more and more power right now, because from the US election to the global pandemic, what we're seeing is a huge influx of information and sometimes competing information. Where there seem to be sort of two truths that are happening. And so we're not quite necessarily able to figure out like which one is the truth, which one is not, who's being accountable, who's kind of putting spin on this. And so this concept of accountable and inclusive institutions is an area that's going to get bigger and bigger and bigger, because we're actually being challenged now to be able to not only get the information, access the information, but also be able to decipher it and figure out what is our truth, what's the truth from where we stand, what's the truth for our situation. So again, when you see a big thing sort of write up like that, it sounds really, really good, but there's a lot of value in breaking it down and deconstructing it a little bit to really understand when we're trying to go for this really big audacious goal around the 2030 agenda. What does that actually look like? What are the components of it? We need to go a little bit deeper. So we can see too a couple of factoids that are part of the sheet. There's some positivity around the global homicide rates declining slowly, but we still recognize that's still pretty darn high. It's a lot higher than we want it to do. We can see that 127 countries have adopted that right to information or freedom of information laws. So just like we were chatting about how important it is to be able to access and have the rights to access that information, but then also once we get it, what's our responsibility and accountability to understanding that language? I think when you look at the very top left and you see every day 100 civilians, this was before COVID-19, are killed in armed conflicts despite protections under international law. I think for most of us that feels, what's the word I'm looking for here? Beyond unfair, but it's unreasonable and it's tragic in a lot of ways. And so, again, we're going to focus today a little bit more on Canada and Canada's role in terms of the criminal justice system and how it applies to SDG 16. But at the same time, I always want you to keep in the back of your head sort of the global impacts that are happening with this too. When we actually look at, in 2019, which is just a couple of years ago, the number of people fleeing war, persecution, and conflict exceeded 79.5 million, the highest ever. And so when you think about our justice system, some of the questions we're going to ask today are, when we talk about access, you're not just talking about access for citizens of Canada, you're talking about access for maybe immigrants or refugees, because we still have such a global issue around having to flee war-torn areas or areas that aren't safe. I think the other piece that's going to be really relevant is the last one at the bottom there, which is that 60% of countries have prison overcrowding. They're mentioning it in terms of the risk of spread of COVID-19, but we're also seeing it bring up a lot of other issues too. And so this concept of incarceration and whether that is sort of our most effective move forward, or is it something that, we sort of took from the past and we're just allowing it to happen today? And that'll be part of the conversation as well. Each SDG has a group of targets. So we have a particular target within each SDG, and within that, there's sort of the sub milestones or sub goals that we try to achieve. So target 16.1 is about reducing violence everywhere. So again, sort of a bigger target, but then the question becomes, so how do we start measuring these targets? So we know we want to have a more peaceful, inclusive, just society, but how do we actually measure? How are we going to show that this is happening? Well, this is where the targets come in. The targets give you an opportunity to actually break it down a little bit and then look for particular milestones to say, if we were to benchmark ourselves a year ago, where are we today? And are we making progress towards achieving this particular sustainable development goal? So under each one, there's actually a ton. I'm not going to go through all of them, but I wanted to at least highlight a couple for you so that you had a little bit of understanding of what the particular target was and a way that we might be able to measure it. And so we said target 16.1, pardon me, this is our reducing violence everywhere. It's sort of a big one. But I love one of the targets they have. So one of the sub targets that they have, one of the milestones is, what is the proportion of the population that feel safe walking alone around the area they live in? And that's a really powerful metric to me. We're not just counting raw numbers in the sense, we're actually counting emotion. How do you feel? Do you feel safe? And so this is a really important one to me, that we don't just measure the raw numbers all the way through, but we actually get towards how individuals are feeling, because that becomes a big part of feeling peaceful, just, and safe. So I really love that metric. Number two, sorry, as I'm flipping back between a piece here. So 16.2 is protecting children from abuse, exploitation, trafficking, and violence. There is one of the scariest thoughts actually is how much human trafficking actually takes place. It's not an issue that gets a ton of limelight. Sometimes it sort of bubbles to the surface, but especially just in Canada, we don't have an amazing track record for exploitation, and particularly trafficking, whether that's children or individuals, humans in general. And so one element, so the part of it's the trafficking, but you can see this captures a lot. One measurement that we're going to use, one milestone in Canada we're going to use, is what's the proportion of young women and men aged 18 to 29 who experience sexual violence by age 18? I'm really, really fortunate to be part of the Man Up, the faculty support for the Man Up group at Georgian. And this is a group of young men who are promoting and advocating to try to bring more awareness to gender-based violence. And so we've seen, especially in post-secondary institutions, a really high degree of individuals who are experiencing sexual violence. And part of that change is being able to speak out on it, to show where some supports are, and to start changing maybe some mindsets and bringing awareness to it. And these young men do a really, really fantastic job of sharing that message. For those who are interested in that, there's actually an asynchronous video as part of Changemaker Residency Week, where you can actually take a look at what they're doing in different ways that you might be able to join either as a member or as an ally towards this mission of ending gender-based violence. If we look at target 16.3, this is promoting, let's see, no one's coming back in here. This is about promoting the rule of law and ensure equal access to justice. And this is where we're going to play a little bit today, is around this access to justice part. And so one of the measurements, one of the metrics they use is what's the proportion of victims of violence, so in the previous 12 months, so we're looking at sort of a year, who reported their victimization to competent authorities or other officially recognized conflict resolution mechanisms. So this is a really important one too, because we're talking about reporting. And when we think about reporting, we sometimes gloss over how many barriers there are to people feeling confident and comfortable to be able to report something, an act of violence that's actually happening. One of the challenges of COVID in terms of the data we're seeing out is an increase of intimate partner violence. That being sort of cooped up in homes that we're in a dangerous area where we don't necessarily have the outlets to go anywhere when we're in lockdown. How do we access some of these resources, and how do we ensure people are staying safe? Part of that is that they feel comfortable and confident to be able to report what's going on. And so we still have a lot of work to do in that particular area too. 16.4, so we want to combat organized crime and illicit financial and arms flows. This doesn't tend to be a super popular topic in Canada. Every now and then we see some sort of organized crime syndicate sort of rise to the media, but we don't typically talk about this particular issue, but it is actually still a really big issue. Their particular metric is more the numeral side of like how many arms or illicit weapons have been seized over the past year. And again, one of those where in Canada, we sort of think that we have comparatively, in a relative sense, a better relationship towards weapons. But as we actually dive into some of the data, we start to realize we still have a lot of work to do. There's still a lot of growth that can happen there. Okay, 16.5, substantially reduce corruption and bribery. Again, one of those where we think in Canada, like, oh, this doesn't really exist. That's more of like a developing country thing where we see a ton of bribery actually happening. The reality, though, is that actually is happening a bit more than we realize, and it happens in different ways. It's not always a monetary way, but we've certainly seen some of our amazing members of government, of parliament, who have had to resign over the past few years due to sort of some corruption issues. And we're watching with social media change makers like you starting to speak out on some of these issues and bringing those to light and really creating the change. So we still have a lot of ways to go. And sometimes we think corruption, bribery is not a Canada thing. It definitely is. And I'm always excited to see our change makers actually speaking out and calling our politicians or whoever, our leaders, to task to say you need to be transparent and you need to be accountable for these things. Developing 16.6 is developing effective, accountable, and transparent institutions. So we talked a bit about this off the hop, but so I won't go too much into it. But basically, that concept again is we need our institutions, the ones that we are relying on, to be ideally effective. Of course, that's what we all want. But most importantly, accountable and transparent. Where is our money going to? Shay's part of something called the Community Benefit Purchasing Project from Senko, and it's so amazing. And it's really starting to bring accountability to where are we spending our money? Are we spending it in ways that are promoting the community? Are we spending it in ways that is actually detracting from the community? This is an area that's going to grow even more and more. One of the metrics they use for this particular 16.6 is, and I really like this one, the proportion of the population who are satisfied with their last experience of public services. So if we just did like a little poll right now of how many people just in this room felt like the last time they dealt with a public institution, that they got great, amazing customer service and got all their questions answered, we'd probably realize that we actually have a little bit more work to do in this particular area in a whole bunch of ways, from the big ways to the small ways. Okay, team, we're almost done here with some of these targets, but really, really want you to at least have a sense of them before we dive into our collective conversation. So 16.7 is ensuring responsive, inclusive, and representative decision-making. So this hits us in a couple of different ways. Again, we in Canada, we're pretty proud of our democratic system. We do believe in the concept of one person, one vote. But I think when we look at our voter turnout rates, that there's a pretty big gap happening here, that we don't necessarily actually have inclusive and representative voting, which means that we don't wind up having inclusive and representative decision makers that are actually making it to the table. And so some of the questions and metrics that we look at are, the proportion of the population, so of all of us, who believe that the decision making, so that the decisions that are being made by federal government, by provincial government, or by our courts, that they are inclusive and responsive, specifically by sex, age, disability, and population group. And as we explore that concept a little bit more, we're going to realize more and more about how often there's definitely marginalized groups who are being left out of this conversation and who are not being represented effectively and equally by the decisions that are coming down. Now, not all of that is malicious. Some of it is just patriarchal. It's just something that, it's a lack of awareness, but it's an area that we're watching your generation in particular. When I say your generation, I mean millennials, start to really push back and demand that accountability and demand that inclusivity. So we're moving towards it in a very positive way, but we still have a further way to go too. 16.8 is strengthen the participants in global governance. So we just sort of talked about that is, with our current voter rates, there's still a lot of voter apathy. And I was really encouraged to see higher numbers of youth who were starting to get engaged. But I can tell you a story from my own little life in terms of when I was a youth that, I didn't understand the political system. This was one of my biggest problems. And I wanted to vote. So I was really, I felt like it was my duty to vote, but I didn't know my candidates. And I actually didn't even know who I was voting for the first few times. I was voting for a party, or I thought I was actually voting for the prime minister as opposed to the person in my riding. And these are really common things that even when they, CBC will do little exposés where they interview people on the street and say, who do you vote for? Most of us still use the language of like, I voted for Trudeau or I voted against Trudeau, or, but we're not even recognized. That's actually our system in Canada isn't built that way. So, and in order to actually ensure that our participation is increased, we have to increase the awareness and understanding of how the system actually works. Been involved in some amazing conversations around switching the electoral system, so having electoral reform. And I think it's a super valuable conversation because we are using a really old version. That being said, I'm always quick to say, I at least want to see us try using the current system once properly to see what happens before we just change it, but maybe we can't get there. Maybe we need to change it. But anyways, that's just my personal little 2 cents on where we can get better in terms of governance and our participation in it. 16.9 is about providing universal legal identity. Again, in Canada, we're pretty privileged in that sense that most of us, there's a system in place, but across the world, this is a huge problem actually in terms of individuals not having that legal identity, and not having that legal identity leads to a whole bunch of challenges, especially around citizenship, around mobility, and around human rights. So again, a bigger conversation that maybe isn't focused as directly in Canada, although it still is there. But nonetheless, one that is really, really important for us to bear in mind as we look to create more just and equitable systems. 16.10 is about ensuring public access to information and protecting those fundamental freedoms. And again, this is, we sort of touched on this at the very top, but what we really want to look at there is, do we have access? But once we get that access, are we understanding where our freedoms are actually being potentially challenged by these or being supported by these? So A, do we have the access? B, do we understand it? And then C, what do we do about it? How does it link to our particular life? So again, one of those really important perspectives that we carry as we look to move towards the 2030 agenda in this particular SDG. 2 more to go in terms of our targets. These are a little bit broader targets. 16A, which is about strengthening national institutions to prevent violence and combat terrorism and crime. So again, not something that maybe we are directly day-to-day sort of influenced by, but one of the metrics is actually really fascinating because it's the existence of independent national human rights institutions that are in compliance with the Paris Principles. I think that's really fascinating that, you can't necessarily judge just on a raw count of how many independent national human rights organizations, but it also does speak to where the collective consciousness is, where our collective priorities are. So really, really fascinating if we're going to map it over the span of the next 15 years to see how much farther does that grow. And one of those really critical parts is how many are independent, ensuring that there's an accountability and a transparency. And finally, the last one is about promoting and enforcing non-discriminatory laws and policies. And that one is a little more challenging, and one I really hope we're going to have some fun talking about today, because we still do have a lot of discrimination that winds up being evident in our current laws and policies. And we're starting to bring attention to it and we're starting to change it. But there's also ones that maybe we actually haven't even recognized yet as being problematic or as being discriminatory, that's just starting to emerge. So I'm really inspired by the conversations that are starting to happen here. Okay, so all that's our quick dump of brain knowledge around SDG 16. There's so much more you could actually dive into as well. That's just really top level. But they were pieces that I really wanted to make sure that before we dove into our breakouts today, before we dove into our conversation, that recognizing that, we have some amazingly brilliant community justice services students with us today, but we also have some students who maybe have never heard about the SDGs, or maybe they're not even living in Canada, so they're not familiar with the Canadian justice system. Wanted to just paint an overview so that we are all coming from sort of the same spot when we begin. Specifically speaking about Canada, as just a couple more facts, there are some incredible work that's being done by the Canadian government around access to justice. And so there's some links that we'll drop into the chat here in terms of both the SDGs, but in terms also of our Canadian government and the efforts they're making very specifically around increasing that access to justice across a whole bunch of different platforms. Because globally, more than 5 million people are actually lacking that meaningful access to justice. So 5 billion, 2/3 of the world does not have meaningful access to justice. It's, whenever I hear that, my mind is absolutely blown. I think, how is this possible? And really do appreciate that as much as we have a lot of work to do in Canada, and this access to justice area is applicable here as well, that number is way, way too high. And so that accessibility will be a big theme that we'll talk about. Also in Canada, so almost half of our adult population is going to experience a serious legal problem over the course of a 3-year period. So pick any 3-year period, and half of the population of our adults is going to have a serious legal problem. Just looking at our group today, and we are most of us would be of adult age. In the next 3 years, half of us are going to interact in a way. So this isn't just something that we're looking to do for everyone else. This is very personal to us too. We are going to be the ones also experiencing it. So being able to share and learn and explore some of these topics with each other is really, really important. The other piece to that is most of the time, many of the people who are reporting that serious legal problem, they're actually experiencing multiple legal problems. So there's a comorbidity that's actually happening with this as well, where we're not just having the one issue when we try to deal with it, one issue is leading to 5 other issues. And sometimes we see that in terms of, even some of the, when you think about what someone was charged with, and there tends to be a list of, 5, 10 charges. It's not just the one. Really want to emphasize before we dive into our breakouts, the concept of barriers. So there are so many barriers in place, and that's where we're going to spend some time sort of looking at them and maybe trying to break them down. But when you think about our barriers, they're related to financial cost, to time, to complexity. Like we just talked about, you have 5 charges, and I don't even know the language of half of the things I'm being charged with right now. This lack of information and availability of different services, that's a big area. Sometimes, again, we think with the internet, we've got access to everything, but not all of us even have access to internet in an equitable way. And these contribute to other problems. Typically as well, it's all vulnerable and traditionally marginalized populations that have additional barriers when it comes to accessing justice. This could be marginalized in basically every category. So it could be, gender identity, race, culture, age, language, literacy is one, disability income, geographic location. And so like we say, like as much as tech can sort of help us access and solve some of them, they don't solve it all. Just putting, things on the internet doesn't actually solve all of our actual challenges. Okay, too much talking from Q. We're going to move us to our next little piece, which is going to be our activity. So I'm going to maybe stop sharing. Well, maybe I'll keep it up. So this is what our first breakout room is going to kind of look like for those who are still following on the screen. So we're basically going to explore the criminal justice system, the current criminal justice system in Canada, under 4 categories. And so what we're really thinking about is that a successful criminal justice system, it's dependent on a whole bunch of factors, and they're separate, but they're actually kind of related. So these could involve like law enforcement, prosecution services, the defense bar, our actual courts, things like legal aid, victim services, correctional services, the legislature, so like the parliament, like we talked about, our government actual structures. And then there's a whole bunch of various stakeholders, service providers, community groups, could be social support systems, housing, healthcare, education, employment, child protection. All of these kind of make up the, what do we call it? Like the puzzle pieces that actually bring together where some of these barriers actually sit. So the goal of this actual breakout and conversation and exploration together is thinking about the current criminal justice system in Canada and fully recognizing that, there's going to be a degree of familiarity with the criminal justice system in Canada within your breakout group. Really want you to, recognize there's no right, wrong answer in this. This is really about a brainstorm. And thinking about some of the barriers, and again, some of the barriers you may have personally experienced or somebody has actually experienced, could be really different than the barriers that someone else has. And so we're going to sort of co-learn as we go through this too. But I want you to just sort of break them into 4 sort of broader categories. So one around that accessibility that we've talked about a little bit. How easy and inclusive is it to actually access all the components? Something like affordability. And I know that there is the piece we have expectations around legal aid, but not everyone can necessarily access legal aid. And there's also other hidden costs that we don't really think about. When we talk about, well, you can access through technology costs money. There's an affordability gap there in terms of who can pay for internet, who can access internet, who can pay for a phone or a laptop. So that affordability is the other big area that I sort of want you to sort of explore. Paying for a bus to get you to the courthouse or to your lawyer's office. There are affordability issues that sometimes seem small, but they actually wind up really big. Another big area is cultural bias. So which of the barriers that are kind of, currently here Which ones are presenting even greater barriers to maybe individuals from a different cultural background? Really recognizing and taking into account the different barriers when it comes to culture. And then finally, this concept of reintegration. So this was, for anybody who is not familiar at all with that term, reintegration, we use it in the sense of an offender who's maybe been incarcerated, who's trying to reintegrate back into society. So they've served their time, they've served their sentence, and we want to bring them back into society. But we recognize that when you come back into society, there's a lot of stigma and there's a lot of barriers that are actually present there. So we really want to start listing out, what are these current barriers? What do they look like? What are some examples of them? And so I'm going to stop sharing my screen for a second, bring everyone back. And I know that Shay will be setting up our breakout rooms. And as she's doing that, I want to open up the floor either in the chat or feel free, pop on your mic. Do you have any questions about where we're going in this first activity? Does it make sense in terms of the conversation we're going to have for barriers that we're actually looking within these 4 elements? If it does make sense, maybe a thumbs up emoticon, emoji, or a yes in the chat. Thank you, Taylor. Awesome. Are there any questions before we dive in? Thank you, Jake, Kirsten, and Bree, and others who I can't see because you're not actually on my actual screen. So thumbs up to all of you too. I can only see half the screen right now. So yes, thank you. Okay, fabulous. All right, so for this first group, Shay's going to no problem. Don't know about criminal justice of Canada. That's actually ideal. We really want a diverse group who have a variety of understanding around the criminal justice system. So there'll be others in your group who maybe have a different perspective, who know a bit more. That's great. What are your thoughts? There's no right or wrong here. What if you had to envision some of the barriers that you think you might run into or that you think that you may have heard about? Just sharing those is fine. So in your breakout rooms, really encourage you to take off your mics and actually converse, or to do so in the chat as well, to be able to chat back and forth. Sorry, one last tip about the breakout room. Your breakout room itself, the number of your breakout room is the number of the canvas that you're going to go to. So when you're back on Mural, along the right-hand side, you'll see breakout room 1, breakout room 2, breakout room 3. That's the corresponding room. So that's the canvas we want you to work on. So if you're in breakout room number 6, when you get into the mural, look on the right-hand side and you want to click on breakout room 6, and it's going to bring you to the actual canvas that shows those 4 areas that we're going to play in. Okay, awesome. Shay, are you guys see the thumbs up? We're good to go. All right, team, we'll go have some fun, have some great conversations. And this is going to lay the foundation for our next envisioning exercise that'll take place after this. So have some fun. Hey, Nolan. Hey, Brooklyn. Do you guys need a new link? Or did you just step away for a minute? Nope. There they go. Do you want me to close all the rooms, Shay?
The prompt didn't come up for me.
Oh.
For some reason.
That's cool. I'll close them all. We'll bring them all back.
Sorry about that.
No, that's all good. All participants given 60 seconds. Okay, so they're coming back. Beautiful.
Set them for 19 minutes anyways. So.
Awesome. Okay, welcome back. I think most are coming. There's a few that still need to come back. I think we had a little tech glitch there because I can see a few people are trying to join from outside, so you might have actually got bumped right out of the yeah, Taylor might have got kicked out. Thanks, Melissa. apologies on that. Hey, that's tech for us, right? That's this is why we can't just say tech's going to solve all the barriers, because there's still barriers within tech too. So appreciate you going along, and we got a chance to sort of peek in on some of the murals and some of the content that was done in the murals, and some really fascinating stuff. So really hoping that aside from just the ideas that kind of made it onto the mural, that you also had the chance to have some really generative and interesting conversations with each other. So getting a diverse perspective from different people around, yeah, maybe this is a barrier, but how is it a barrier to me or to you? That was a big part of the first half of that exercise. So just want to open it up before we move on to the second portion of the session and of the exercise today, with the workshop. I want to open it up to you and ask, either feel free to come onto the mic or in the chat if that's something you're more comfortable with, but just share a couple of insights around where you and your team, what kind of barriers did you identify? And maybe there was one that sort of you never thought of before, or one that someone phrased in a different way. Would love to get a little feedback from sort of each team as we go through as to what the barriers were and some of your thoughts around it. So open it up again. Feel free to pop on the mic or just even into the chat. Just what were some of the barriers that you came up with?
I'll go, I guess. So
Awesome.
we were breakout room 2, and we thought of like a bunch of different things for each of them. But do you want me to like go through one and then my group can like tag onto it, or like?
Yeah, absolutely. Whatever you're comfortable with. That'd be fantastic.
Okay, so we thought like accessibility was kind of difficult for like ideas. So like for our barriers, we were like, what if they don't have access to anything, and what if they don't have the education to know what to look up? And then we also put lack to means to transportation. So like what if they don't have access to a way around in order to like get to court dates or like anything like that? And then also like a lack of understanding of just everything in general.
Yeah.
I don't know if my group wants to jump on to do the rest of them, or I can do it. I don't care.
That's awesome so far, Kaylin. So yeah, go ahead, Het.
Yeah, I have no idea what the criminal justice about the Canada, but I have tried my best, and my group, like, I want to thanks to them that they give me some knowledge about it. And yeah, so like in like for the what I can say about the cultural bias that we discuss about the barriers that the justice system has a huge bias of opinion against the races, cultures, and genders and ages. Like we can see, like in Canada right now, like a lot of international students are coming, like a lot of from the other countries like Africa or India or from any other countries, and sometimes they like feel shy or what we can say are lonely, that they don't have friends or they don't have anyone, and they think that someone is bullying me and in college or in schools, and they just got depressed by the races and the gender. So that's kind of a barrier for some people, like not belongs to a country or they come to another country. So we can like the idea is that we can share the knowledge on the religion cultures of the country that they belong to, the country that they are coming in. They can share, they can talk with other people or the classmates or their college students, and they make friends, they talk, and they just don't take that bullying in a negative way, and just go and apologize or just say hi, my name is Hate Patel, or I'm a student here, I'm an international student, I just want to be a friends with you guys so that we can share our things, stuff like that. So I think that's a great idea for doing in the country.
That's awesome, Het. Really love that share. And thank you, Kaylin, for kicking it off too. Yeah, like Het's really hitting on some critical parts that we talked about in terms of the different targets that are within the SDG 16 too, right? When we think about other cultures, when we think
Yeah,
about that diversity, that inclusion, and that lack of accessibility. So
exactly.
really great contribution, Het. Thank you for that. And big shout out too to Het's team who I really love
Yeah,
it
I just
when
want to thank my whole team, like Kalen and Nicole and everyone, Jacob. Yeah,
That's so great to hear. This is exactly what we're hoping for, right? Is that we're all here
exactly.
to kind of learn together. So, yeah, big shout out to that team for helping. Any other team, some other thoughts, whether that's in the, whether you want to come on the mic or you want to just drop it in the chat. What were some of the, barriers that you found that you had, that your group was actually talking about in any one of the particular 4 categories?
So our group was Breakout Room 3, and we had some interesting ideas because I saw a lot of people put the language barrier and accessibility, or sorry, cultural bias, but we put it in accessibility because Ashley had an interesting thought, just how like um, ASL is not overly accessible. So instead of just having it in like cultural bias, like just not being able to understand someone or just, the situation, the charges, anything, like maybe there's no access to ASL interpreters or any interpreter for that matter. We also just talked just like affordability, like, when you go to court, like a lot of people don't want to just wear any like regular clothes, right? Like you want to look presentable, you want to look clean, perfect, like right, whatever. So like for accessibility for the ideas, like maybe like there's something like a clothing drive or something for people and offenders who need those kind of clothes, but they can't afford them. Same thing, like maybe you don't have a car, maybe you could do public transit vouchers. Affordability, like you said, like not everyone is eligible for legal aid. Maybe there's other options we can try to think about because, lawyers are very expensive and stuff like that. Yeah.
That's some awesome contributions, Cam. Thank you for those. And yeah, I think the light's being shone on, and obviously we have some students with a really great background around some of these issues because you're pulling out some really, really powerful ones around these barriers that currently exist and ones that we really have to start thinking about a little bit more if we're going to move towards achieving the goals of the SDGs, specifically SDG 16. If we're going to be able to move the needle on a lot of those things, we have to have these kinds of conversations. Just want to quickly throw it out. Any other team want to share before we move on to our second component?
I just wanted to share with you, everyone, how our team came up with the barriers and ideas. It was a great teamwork. Shout out to everyone in breakout room number 6. So in accessibility, in barriers, the first thought is the first step. It's the most important to take, and it's the one that is most difficult. And the barrier to that first step is the intimidation that people see in law enforcement. I'm scared of the police. Oh, he has the authority to throw me in a jail and I won't ever come out. So that is something that goes through everyone's mind first. So that was what we came up with. Secondly, affordability. It's not very easy to pay for legal representation, and it's not easy to pay for good legal representation. That is very important, good legal representation. And cultural bias. There is a gender-based and racial cultural bias in the society, and that is reflected in the law enforcement somewhere. Maybe as Taylor in our group said, maybe it's not institutional, but it is individual. Mm. And in reintegration, the main point was that people are intimidated by the tag that the person has more than who the person is, because we don't know who the person is. It's always the tag that keeps us away. It's judging a book by the cover, right? And ideas, this was a point that we weren't able to talk much, but I guess we did have an idea about what we wanted. And for accessibility, we thought, one way of making police officers seem less intimidating is promote them through social media. Social media is a great tool, and it's meant to be utilized in a good and effective way. And it makes people actually seem more human, right? Seeing people grow up on social media, oh, they've gone through the same teenage years that we have. And I guess affordability, raise awareness for available subsidies, cultural bias, have the conversation. That is very important. Something that I heard from a comedian once. It is us that need to talk about our differences to appreciate our similarities first. And reintegration, where some previously incarcerated people are more normal than some of us. And this, we just talked about a TikToker who was incarcerated at one point in his life. And when he posts these stories and videos, he seems more normal than a lot of people that we meet in real life. So again, it comes to the same point. It's the tag that intimidates us, not the person.
What a fantastic share. Thank you, Zainab. Like, I love hearing that your group got into that level of discussion, and so many great points being emerging. And actually, so Zainab talked about it, sort of the last group though, about coming to sort of the ideas side. So clearly you guys found the second portion of like the actual box and being like, well, we have ideas, let's go with ideas, which is great because those actually help generate even further conversations too, right? And when we put a solution down or a potential idea for a solution, it helps sort of create a deeper conversation around what that barrier is, because as within that solution, we're looking for ways that we can actually support that. But there's a little bit of a sneaky trick here in that the second portion of this isn't just about generating ideas, it's generating ideas based on a certain rule. So this is actually based on a gentleman by the name of John Rawls, and he did an experiment back in 1971, believe it or not, and we call it the reincarnation envisioning exercise. So this is so John basically asked people. They said, "We want you to design the elements of the future criminal justice system you want to see, but here's the big if." What's the future criminal justice system you want to see? What are the pieces that have to be a part of it if you don't know who you would come back as? So imagining yourself, if you're reincarnating into a new body, you don't know if you're going to be male, female, trans, fluid. You don't know if you're going to be an immigrant, a refugee, or a current citizen. You don't know if you'll be wealthy, poor, where your socioeconomic status will be. You don't know if you'll have mental health challenges. You don't know if you will be Indigenous and living within a particular Indigenous community. You might be food insecure, or you might be home insecure, housing insecure. You could actually be homeless. So thinking about yourself, not knowing how you would come back, that's where we want to start generating our ideas from. So I'm going to suspend our belief for a second and say, if you had no idea who you would come back with, who would you come back as? What kind of system would you want to ensure was actually in place? And so using those same four categories around accessibility, affordability, cultural bias, and reintegration, we want you to chat as a team again. And maybe there may be new people in this breakout room that you might have the old people, that's okay. We're coming from different perspectives. We really want you to share some of the ideas that you would put in place. What are the components? And at the very end, I'll talk to you about the three main themes that John Rawls's experiment actually brought out, that the vast majority of people agreed on. These sort of three things had to be a part of it. So what we're looking for then is for our next breakout session to be you thinking about, okay, what are some of your ideas for the criminal justice system in Canada, how it needs to look within each of these categories, but with the caveat that you don't know what position you're going to be coming at it from. So not knowing where you would be, what do you want to make sure is still a place in that? Okay, so I'll ask Shay if she can set up our rooms again for us. And again, so stoked to hear everybody supporting each other, having these conversations. This is what this really is about. Same thing in terms of your breakout room that you go to, please go to that canvas. on the actual mural, the first one said breakout room. This one says BR room. So if you're a number 2, your BR room 2, that'll take you to the right canvas. If you already had some of your other ideas that you put up there, no problem. Just going to ask that you kind of move those around so that you can ideate together around what kind of pieces the system needs to have. What do you see in the future, coming from the place of not knowing how you would be interacting with that system in the future? Okay. Any questions on that before Shay sends us off? Okay. Seem like we're pretty good. Okay. Well, hit it, Shay. We'll jump in and have some great conversations, team. Thank you for shortening the rooms, by the way. The timing, I'm looking at the clock, I'm like, damn. But that was good feedback. I'm really glad that people actually jumped in and shared.
Yeah, Ket's comments were awesome. Sorry. If you're back in playing, I'm just going to mute myself. It's neat that you can like join in on the breakout rooms.
Yeah.
Yeah, and that happened during the Ashoka U exchange a couple of times where like we got broken out and then the facilitator would drop in and just be like, how's everything going? You guys understand what we're doing? Oh, it's a great idea.
It makes a huge difference too. I mean, that's where, honestly, I love being able to take a peek at the mural and be like, okay, is there a team that's not doing anything? I jumped into one yesterday in the session I was doing and all the mics were off. All the cameras were off, all the mics were off. And I'm like, probably not a huge conversation taking place. How, what do you need help with? And someone was like, we need the mural link. And I'm like, sure, we can give you that too. And just like nobody speaking. But, the reality is that those joining us, they're primarily joining us to get their co-op credit. They're not coming because they're so passionate about change making in these sessions. So we just have to accept that there's going to be varying degrees of engagement.
Yeah. I think that happened in a breakout room with Nicole the other day where the guy was the only one with my mic on or my camera on, but other people were talking. But I just we were waiting for the breakout room to close. I was like, I'm probably just like really big on your screens, aren't I? Just my face.
Welcome to Shay's room.
Cool.
Pretty funny.
Yeah, that's funny. Conversation was really good then too.
Nice.
I liked being in it.
Yeah, you know what? These are, who was I just saying this to? Shoot, it might have been Lucky this morning in that session, but just how like when we're in person, it like you're there with each group, like you are kind of doing the walk by and you're hearing the little parts, and it's so energizing to see the brilliance and the enthusiasm of students and then their collective ideas as they're having these great conversations. And I really think that our team, as much as we facilitate it, man, we benefit from having these conversations.
Yeah, absolutely. I think Laura's in this conversation too. She's been put into a couple of the breakout rooms.
Oh, is she still here?
She was at one point. She was in the first breakout room. So.
Oh, good.
Yeah.
She'd asked in that session, I'm like, I gotta go because I gotta get to the session. And she said, well, I don't have anything. Do you want me to come co-pilot? And I said, no, Shay's got it.
Yeah.
You don't, but we haven't connected. I want to make sure where tech is working, all that stuff. And so funny then even the tech thing was kind of challenging as it turned out. So
yeah, I
almost there.
Going through and like unplugging the Wi-Fi router and like it's like 10:15. I'm like, oh no. We'll just throw the data on. Right.
Well, I love you. I did have a thought because we had such a big rainstorm today. And I was like, of course, it's only going to happen during my session. Like not when it's only going to happen if it does. And thankfully, touch wood, it hasn't. But I was like, where can I go? Like if my power went out is what I was thinking mostly because I'm in the country. So the power does go out. And I'm like, where can I go? Like I can't just go to campus anymore. Can I go to a coffee shop? Yeah. Am I allowed to go sit in there now? I don't know. It's kind of funny.
Yeah. Right, we had lots of rain too. I think Blue Mountain's like closed now, I think.
I can go again.
Awesome.
Mind.
Thanks, Kayla.
So when we did this, like our last breakout room, our group did both of them. So we had 2 new people in our group. So just for like a little bit of like reference for accessibility, we just said like someone, like you could have access if you go to someone's house or like go to a library or somewhere that has access to get the proper information, and then somewhere that provides programs as well to help guide them in the right direction. And for affordability, we put try and seek free legal aid within the courts, and a standard income to have a level of equal opportunity. And for culture bias, we put providing language courses to those who need it. So an interpreter for all languages and perhaps ASL, and then educating justice authorities on equality, which is like a huge one because I feel that justice authorities don't have proper education on like races, and like they have such a biased opinion, especially like older millennials when it comes to that kind of thing. And then for reintegrating, we put applying to be in programs. So like when you're in jail, like in order for you to have a successful outcome, you have to apply in order to be successful, in order to get in the programs you need to help you. Same with like educational opportunity within the institutions. And then the offender should talk to a therapist before coming into the community to like deal with their mental issues and their addictions, and being able to prove themselves to not be their past self. So like kind of like, I know that you'll only understand what I'm talking about in like our classmates, but like with Timmy, like he has to be able to like go and talk to someone when it comes to proving himself to the community and like his friends and family.
Yeah, awesomely said, Galen. And I think aside from all the great ideas and great components that your team clearly generated, one of the themes, the meta theme that really came out was how compassionate and empathetic and understanding your solutions were, your ideas were. You were really taking it from the lens of that human. And yeah, Timmy or another human in terms of really recognizing the barriers that they're facing and trying to design something new. So fantastic job, team. Really, really love those insights. Any other teams want to share a little bit in terms of some of the solutions they came up with, some of the ideas they had for what this future criminal justice system in Canada needs to look like to ensure that we're taking care of each other?
I think I can share something like we did in our break room, the second break room. So we talk about the police the behaviors when sometimes they just get so much they have a rage, or they get in anger and they scare some people, and they just want to show them that we have a power in our hand, that that we can do anything. But that's wrong, actually, that they are just taking the trust of the policemen away from the people, and they shouldn't do that. And the idea to solve this thing is like to educate the police officer during that training, and they have to tell that these are the rules, these are the new rules that you have to follow, and if you do that, then there will be a straight action taken on you. And there is one more thing that we can do is that that we can take a record every day, like from a individual policeman, that what they did today to protect or to help people, or did they violate their power, or they just took the law in their hands. Did they do that? And if they did that, then they should action like to against that policeman, and they could show them that that you don't have a power, or you don't have a right to scare people. That they should do that. I think so.
That's fantastic, Het. Thank you for sharing that. I think hearing that, it all comes to mind. And I think Zainab talked about it earlier from the first session too, around ideas that
Exactly.
we really need to change our current relationship with law enforcement. And that's
Yes.
going to come from both sides. We need to be better educated, but as Het pointed out and his team pointed out, it also has to come from educating the police officers and law enforcement in terms of understanding that there is an intimidation factor. Not that there's no understanding right now, but even a deeper understanding, a deeper appreciation, and building those relationships. And we see different communities in Canada really trying to do that with more community mobilization practices. But there needs to be a deepening of that conversation, of that understanding. So great job, Het and team. That's a really perfect example of an area we would want for a future criminal justice system to be barrier free.
Exactly.
Fantastic.
Thank you.
Can I just speak on my group as well?
Yeah, Kirsten.
I was in the same group as Heat. Also having training the police, having like a calm attitude, a calm demeanor, going into altercations, interactions with people, and like more education that way.
It's such a great point, Kirsten. I would add even education and training. You know, when we think about our law officers, our law enforcement officers, you know, they're clearly going into often high intense situations. And so how do we better arm them from an education standpoint in terms of how to approach, but then secondly, in terms of their supports to ensure that they have the capacity to meet whatever situation with the most appropriate perspective, most appropriate approach that they would come to. Because currently, I think to Kirsten's point, there is a challenge right now that we're seeing that too many stories happening that where law enforcement are maybe reacting to circumstances that from the outside, from our position looking in, doesn't seem appropriate. And so education, is that a training perspective? And is that a re-envisioning of our relationship to law enforcement and the role it plays in our society? Really love that your team brought that up for discussion. It's a deep one and a big one, and an area that when I think about the SDG and some of the different targets, how reliant they are on law enforcement and the public having a good relationship, having a relationship that helps each other. And if the current relationship is one that actually sort of hinders each other because there's intimidation or there's a lack of trust, we're going to have a really hard time getting to achieve our goals of 2030 with that gap that's there. So really love that point. Anyone else want to toss in something that they came up with, something their team came up with in terms of ideas for what our future in Canada could look like?
Cam has his hand there.
Oh, I just missed it. Thanks, Shay.
I wanted to touch on what you guys were just talking about. I totally agree with like everything, because like we've been seeing like just like lots of videos of like use and force, or like overuse of force and everything. And like I agree with like educating like police officers more, but like it's also about like us as like the bystanders and seeing it from a different perspective, we also need to educate ourselves because we don't always see the full story, right? Like a lot of the times we have no idea what happened before or after or during. We don't know who this person is, who the cop is, like anything like that. And I think like we're always so quick to jump and be like, oh, it's all the police officer's fault. This guy's innocent, whatever, whatever. When in reality, before that, he could have been horrible. He could have been non-compliant and everything else. So I just also think like it goes both ways.
Yeah, really excellent point, Cam. Couldn't agree more. And that is where that relationship, there's two sides to it, and education and training and support has to happen on both of those. Important not to lose that though. So thank you for making sure that that got brought back up as an important point in the conversation. So want to end today a little bit with a couple of things. One, I want to let you know where the experiment of 1971 actually netted out. So when Rawls did the experiment, they basically just discovered 3 common denominators. So when they asked all these people under this reincarnation model, you don't know who you're coming back as, what do you want the system to look like? There's 3 things that kept coming up that they were able to kind of group all the answers into as the primary themes. So one they call the greatest equal liberty principle, which is a mouthful, the greatest equal liberty principle. But this is where all people are provided the greatest amount of freedom they can attain, as long as it doesn't take away from the freedom of others. And so that's one of the ones that seems really like, oh, that makes sense. And yet we're finding out just from today's conversation, that's a difficult one to achieve, because it means we have to define freedoms. We have to define bias. We have to be able to define, what is taking away from somebody else, but not taking away from our actual freedom. So a really interesting theme that really emerged, that we want as much freedom as possible, but the caveat of that being, as long as it's not actually taking away from someone else. The second point was called the difference principle. And this is where justice provides the greatest benefit to the most disadvantaged. And that's something that if we look at our current system is probably not being reflected that way. That right now our current system probably provides the greatest benefit to the most advantaged as opposed to the most disadvantaged. And so it was fascinating when you are coming from the perspective of, I don't know who I will come back as, I don't know what my circumstances I will return as, that became a major primary theme, that if we're going to design a system, we have to make sure that it gives the greatest benefit to the most disadvantaged. And yet our current system, when we look at it, is probably failing to meet that in a number of ways. The third is called the equal opportunity principle. So this is the third of the 3 themes. And this is where so remember 1971, this is where the status of a person or a group never in and of itself limits the opportunities provided to them. So where the status of a person or a group never in and of itself limits the opportunities provided to them. And what we could see through what some of the teams were sharing was these themes around inclusivity, around bias actually being taken down and broken through, those barriers being broken through. So it's a fascinating study, especially when you consider it was 1971. And I would suggest that all 3 of those common denominators are still really relevant today. They're ones that we would still look forward and say, you know what, there's still a lot of bias that's kind of sitting in here. How are we going to break down these barriers? How are we going to break down accessibility bias and affordability bias and cultural bias and reintegration bias, all these different biases that are still prevalent. But if we were designing for the future, we might choose then to design a system that ensures that is prioritized so it doesn't show up down the road. So that's where John Rawls's experiment kind of ended up. And so how I want to leave off today is opening up to any questions and answers. But as we do that, I'm also going to ask you to do one last piece, which is either in the mural, if you want, or in the chat, if you prefer. I'm going to offer everyone the chance today to leave a bias of their own behind. You've just been through a week of change making, of some different ideas. You hopefully just had some really compelling conversations with your peers. We all carry bias. Our systems carry bias. And we want to offer the chance for everyone to be able to leave one behind today. And whether it's one that's a huge one for you, or maybe it's just a small one that doesn't show up that often, but you want to leave it behind. On the mural, on the far right-hand side, or number 36, if you're looking down at the outline, there's you can drop a sticky note in there. And so what bias are you going to leave behind today, or into our chat if there's something that you can choose to, rid yourself of, to actually stop carrying and let it go, so that we could actually move forward towards, and this will be our 2-hour little contribution towards the SDG 16, is that if we can all leave a little bias behind, we're actually getting a little bit closer to achieving the goals that SDG 16 is setting us out for. And so with that, I'll also open up to any Q&A. Are there any questions or clarifications or other pieces you even wanted to share from your breakout groups or your compelling conversations that maybe we didn't quite get time for? We've got about 5 minutes left here. If anybody wants to pop on the mic or even into the chat, share some of their insights from today. I can see some great ones already being dropped into our mural in terms of the bias that we can leave behind today. Great one, Riley. I'm just going to share a few that have popped in already. So less judgmental towards those less fortunate. I love that coming up, because that was a real big theme of what today was flipping our mindset so we can design a system from the greatest space of empathy, of one where we are actually putting ourselves in other people's shoes and saying, what is the best system for anyone, for us as a human? There's more to the justice system than the law factor. Yeah, it's complex. And I really appreciate that that's a bias that we're going to sort of leave behind, is that these are complex issues that require exactly what we had today, is compelling conversation with our peers to start to explore. And, 1 2-hour session isn't going to clear, all the challenges that are within it, but it does get us one step closer to have a better understanding of others and their cultures. Yeah, I think on the whole, that's one that we can all certainly strive to even do more. Hearing just some of our cultural mix today and the value that comes from being able to share those perspectives, the courage it takes to not know a system at all and then be asked to be part of that conversation, and yet the value that comes out of it is really, really impressive. I really love this bias. Leaving behind. Canadian law enforcement is anything but scary. It actually thrives on community and togetherness. Yeah, what if we actually start revisiting some of our relationships, some of our bias towards our expectations, or even focusing in on, there's going to be a few negatives, but are we hyper-focused on those negatives? Are we seeing the positives in the same balance that we're looking at our systems? Because being able to do so without that direct passion, without that emotion, is going to give us the best chance at finding solutions that actually address everything. Access to language we understand isn't necessarily cultural. Yeah, great point, right? Our access. I really love the teams that we're talking about ASL as a component. I think that as an accessibility piece is something that often doesn't come up. And the concept of translators, whether that's a verbal language, whether that is, sign language. At the Ashoka conference, actually, we had an incredible session on individuals with non-speaking autism, and looking at new ways for accessibility to ensure their voices can still be heard. And I do think we're moving into a technological space where we can address a lot of these pieces. And certainly, whether we're doing it perfectly or not, we can certainly move better. Less judgmental. Yeah, looking at a couple of these, great stuff in the chat. Riley talking about systemic racism. Yeah, we're making steps, team, and today's a great piece of it. So yeah, are there any other questions or thoughts or any other bias that you can choose to leave behind today, for maybe even this week, that you're going to be able to move forward for, the last 4 weeks of your school, of your term? For some of you, your Georgian career, or this chapter of your Georgian career, what's something that you can, leave behind today, a mindset or an attitude that maybe came out of today or at any time this week as a little bit of an aha, or a little bit of a learning, and take the opportunity to drop that here today forever and move forward with that new perspective. It's a great one. People should not be scared. They have it all right because it is democracy. Shay and I were just talking about this issue of the concept of democracy and how we need to have deeper conversations around that piece as well, and recognizing human rights in general too, in terms of the roles that they're playing. And okay, I think it looks like our activity sort of stopped, so I think we'll give everyone the gift of an extra minute before we you have to go on to your next session, maybe at 12:30. So Shay's just dropping in some links into, in case you want some extra information. There's some great resources too that you can find directly on the mural if you're interested in digging into any of these areas a little bit more. Really just want to offer my sincere thanks to all of you for participating in this. The compelling conversation doesn't work unless we actually have a conversation. So I really love and appreciate that you did so both in your groups, but then also in our greater group, and that we could learn a little bit from each other. And also just a quick little shout out to Shay. You're the best. Thanks for rocking this session with me and for taking care of all the tech stuff on the back end. Have a great rest of your week, everyone. Hope we see you, especially at the final closing ceremonies today. I think it's going to be an amazing session. So really look forward to it. Thanks. Have a great rest of your day. Okay, we'll see you later. We're going to shut her down.